Ever feel like, your emotions are just kind of running the show, like a runaway train, just completely out of control?
Well, in this deep dive, we're like taking back the controls. We're grabbing our conductor hats because you've sent over some honestly really fascinating stuff from that self87101.pdf about
emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, this is not just some like fluffy self-help stuff.
Right.
This is about the real hardcore science, the nuts and bolts of what's actually happening in our brains and bodies when we're, happy, scared, angry, all of it.
You're totally right. And I think for a long time, science kind of, tiptoed around emotion a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like it was this messy, unpredictable thing. But honestly, you can't understand how humans behave, how they think, how they make decisions without really understanding emotions.
Yeah.
They're not just these kind of fluffy extras. They're like fundamental to what makes us human.
Totally. It's like trying to bake a cake and leave out the sugar.
Yeah.
You might get something that technically looks like a cake, but
it's not going to be right.
It's not going to be right.
And speaking of getting things right, this document, it really dives into the difference between emotion and feeling. Two words, honestly, I use interchangeably all the time.
Yeah. It's an easy mistake to make.
Yeah.
But it's a really important distinction. Think of emotions kind of like, ancient programs.
Okay.
Hardwired into us by like thousands and thousands of years of evolution.
Okay.
They're not really about thinking so much as they are about reacting.
Okay.
Like that, jolt of fear you get when you see a snake.
Right.
That's your body just going into like survival mode, right?
Right. Like instant.
No deep thought required. It's just boom.
Okay. So emotion is that instant, like almost knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Where does feeling fit into all of this?
So feeling is like the after party, right?
Okay.
It's the way we experience those actual bodily changes.
Got it.
That are happening during an emotion.
Okay.
So let's stick with our snake example.
Okay.
Your heart's racing, your palms are sweating, maybe your muscles are a little tense.
Yeah.
All those physical changes, that's your body's emotion program, like running in the background.
Right.
Feeling is your brain kind of getting wind of all this commotion and saying, hold on, what's going on here?
Yeah.
It takes all that sensory data, the pounding heart, the clammy skin, and then it interprets that as, I must be feeling afraid.
So it's not even just about like having these reactions. It's about our brain actually like making sense of those reactions.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like translating a foreign language,
Precisely.
This is wild.
And this document does such a great job of like unpacking how that translation process actually happens.
Yeah.
How our brains take these raw physical sensations and turn them into these subjective experiences that we then call feelings.
It's almost like there's like a hidden conversation happening inside all of us all the time.
Yeah.
Between the body and the brain. And speaking of conversations, I got to bring up William James, right? This like pioneering psychologist back in the 1880s.
Ooh, yeah.
Who had some like truly radical ideas about all of this.
He really did, yeah.
Like he basically flipped the script on how we normally think about emotions and feelings.
He did, right.
Right. It's like common sense says like, oh, I'm scared, so my heart's racing.
Right, exactly. I'm sad, so I'm crying.
But he said it's the opposite.
He said it's the other way around.
That we feel scared because our heart is racing.
Yeah.
It's the body's response that comes first, and then the feeling follows.
Exactly.
That's wild.
It's so wild.
So it's not the feeling that triggers the physical. It's the physical that leads to the feeling.
That's what he argued. Yeah.
Mind-blowing.
It was a really groundbreaking idea. And I think, while he wasn't totally accurate, he kind of like lumped feelings and emotions all into one big category.
Sure.
But his emphasis on the body's role, that was spot on.
Okay, so James was onto something.
Yeah.
But like any good scientific theory, it needed like a little refining.
Exactly.
It's a little 2.0.
Yeah. And what James called like bodily changes, we now understand is this thing called the body loop.
Okay, the body loop.
It's like this constant feedback loop between the body and the brain, right?
Right.
It's like our internal organs are sending up this like never-ending news report on what's going on. Heart rate elevated, palms sweaty, muscles tense.
And our brains are acting as like the newsroom.
Yeah.
Right. Taking in all that data.
Yeah. Trying to synthesize it.
Trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of information, right? If
Yeah.
our brains are getting all of that information from our body all the time, it could be so overwhelming. How do we even function?
Right. Well, that's where our amazingly efficient brains come in, right?
Okay.
They've developed this very clever workaround.
Okay.
It's called the as-if body loop.
The as-if body.
It's like the brain's shortcut.
Okay.
It's a way to like anticipate and even simulate feelings, right? Without needing to have like a full-blown physical response every single time.
So you're saying, like, my brain can basically do a feeling rehearsal without my body having to go through the whole emotional roller coaster.
Exactly. Think about, like, you know, a time when you were about to do something really exciting.
Okay.
Or maybe like a little nerve-wracking, like giving a presentation.
Sure.
You don't actually have to experience, like, the physical symptoms of nervousness.
Right.
To know that you might feel that way, right?
Right.
Your brain, just based on your past experiences, basically says, okay, I know this type of situation. Let me, cue up some of those familiar sensations.
Yeah, just in case. Just in case.
Just in case.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. It's like our brains, they have this incredible capacity to, like, learn from our experiences, right?
Yeah.
And then use those memories to almost, like, predict and prepare for the future? Even on an emotional level. That's wild.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
And it highlights how even like our most subjective experiences are still rooted in these like physical processes.
Totally.
And this source, self87101.pdf, it even talks about how things like, like medication can actually influence these pathways too.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Like, if drugs can change how our brains function,
right, exactly,
it would make sense that they would also affect, our emotions and feelings.
Totally, yeah. Think about alcohol, right?
Okay.
It's a depressant. So it actually slows down brain activity, which can lead to you feeling, more relaxed, maybe a little uninhibited.
Right.
But it can also like amplify negative emotions too.
Yeah.
Sadness, anger,
for sure,
things like that. And then on the other hand, you have antidepressants, and those work by targeting like very specific neurotransmitters in the brain. Okay. Help regulate mood. So it's complex.
Yeah.
But I think the main takeaway here is that even our emotions and feelings, right, which can feel very abstract,
right,
they're actually very intricately tied to the physical workings of our brains and body.
Okay. This is already blowing my mind, but this deep dive, it gets like even wilder.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because it turns out there's like this whole spectrum of emotions. It's not just, happy, sad, angry, afraid, like we normally think.
Right, right.
What about things like background emotions?
Oh, yeah.
What are those?
Background emotions, those are more like, I guess you could call them the kind of like subtle emotional undercurrents, right? Of our everyday experience.
Got it.
So enthusiasm, discouragement, maybe even boredom.
Right, right.
These aren't always triggered by like a specific event, right?
Yeah.
Like a sudden scare or, a joyful reunion. They're more so influenced by things like our overall health, how much energy we have, maybe even the weather.
So it's like if our basic emotions are like individual songs on a playlist, right?
Okay.
Background emotions are kind of like the overall mood or the genre of the music that's playing in the background of our lives all the time.
That's a great way to put it. That's a really good analogy. And we might not always be like consciously aware of these background emotions, but they're still like coloring how we perceive and react to things. And then, of course, we have social emotions.
Oh, right.
Right. And those are all about how we relate to other people.
Okay.
So things like compassion, embarrassment, guilt, pride, these are like, these are what make us human.
Right. Yeah. And it makes sense that like those social emotions would be even more complex, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just about like our own internal state.
Right.
It's also about like understanding social cues and other people's intentions and all these like unwritten rules of like human interaction.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that even these really complex social emotions, right? Yeah. The ones that like we might even consider uniquely human.
Right.
They still rely on that same interplay, that same communication between the body and the brain.
So fascinating.
It's really amazing.
Yeah.
And this source, self87-101.pdf, it actually, it goes into some fascinating research on two very specific social emotions, admiration, and compassion.
Tell me everything.
All right. So researchers, they use this technique called fMRI to actually look at what's happening in the brain when people experience these emotions. And what they found is that just like with, basic emotions, regions like the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex light up.
Got it.
And these areas are super important because they're involved in processing, physical sensations and then like turning those sensations into feelings. But here's the really cool part.
Okay.
They found different patterns of brain activity.
Oh, wow.
Depending on the type of admiration or compassion someone was feeling.
So you're saying our brains don't just register like admiration or compassion, like in a general sense, they're actually creating different maps in the brain depending on like the specific flavor.
Exactly.
You got it.
That emotion.
They actually differentiated between admiration for like someone's skills, like a really talented musician, for example, versus admiration for someone's character. Like their generosity or their kindness.
Wow.
And those two types of admiration, they actually activated different parts of the brain.
That's incredible.
Isn't that wild? They found the same thing with compassion too, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. Compassion for physical pain versus compassion for like emotional suffering.
Wow.
Totally different brain regions lit up. It's like our brains have a whole like separate filing system for these like more subtle social emotions, right?
Yeah.
And they're like categorizing them based on whether they're triggered by like, something physical, like a display of skill or something more internal, like a moral judgment.
Exactly. And this distinction between like physical and mental states also seem to like influenced how the brain processed these emotions. Yeah. So in the fMRI study, the brain areas involved in like admiration for skill and compassion for physical pain, they were strikingly similar.
Because they both like relate to the body in a way.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then on the flip side, admiration for, like virtuous deeds and then compassion for mental pain also showed like overlapping activity.
So interesting. It's like the brain was saying, okay, these both involve like understanding and empathizing with someone's like inner world. Yeah. And so that triggers like a particular neural pathway.
Exactly.
This is really making me rethink like this whole nature of emotions and feelings. Yeah. It's not just about like what's going on in our heads. Right. It's also about how our bodies are wired to respond to the world around us.
That's true.
And how our brains then like interpret those bodily changes.
It's amazing.
To create this like incredible tapestry of like our emotional lives.
It really is incredible.
It's like all those like sayings we have about emotions, right? Like gut feeling or, following your heart. They're not just metaphors. Right. Like they're actually reflections of this like really deep connection between our physical selves and our emotional lives.
Totally.
This deep dive has been incredible.
But before we wrap things up, I have like one last question that's kind of been nagging at me this whole time.
Okay.
So if feelings are like ultimately our brain's interpretation of these bodily changes. Okay. Does that mean we can like consciously influence our emotions by changing our physical state?
That is the $1 million question. Right. And self87101.pdf definitely like hints at that possibility. Okay. Think about practices like meditation or deep breathing, right? Okay. Yeah. They're all about regulating the body, right? Your breath, your heart rate, your muscle tension. So by like directly impacting those physical functions, could we be like subtly rewiring our brain's response to emotional triggers over time?
So it's not even just about like calming down in the moment. Right. It's potentially about like shifting our baseline, how we react to like stress and anxiety in the long run.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a quick fix, or a magic cure-all. Right. This document isn't suggesting that like doing yoga every day is suddenly going to like erase anxiety or sadness from our lives. Right. But it is suggesting that by understanding this like very intimate connection between our physical and our emotional states, we might be able to, unlock new possibilities for like managing our well-being.
It's kind of empowering actually to think that like we might have more agency than we realize.
Totally.
Like we're not just passive passengers on this like emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. We can steer a little bit.
We can actually like learn to steer a bit. I love that.
It's a much more dynamic and I think hopeful way of thinking about our emotional lives.
Totally. This deep dive has given me so much to think about, like a whole new perspective.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to those like really subtle signals that my body's sending me and how they connect to what I'm feeling.
I have a feeling you're going to uncover some really fascinating insights.
I'm excited to find out. Well, to our listener out there, what if instead of trying to like ignore or suppress our emotions, we actually started paying closer attention to what our bodies are trying to tell us?
Could that be the key to, unlocking a deeper understanding of ourselves and maybe even navigating the complexities of being human with like more awareness and more resilience, something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.